wouldn't sit down if I were you, because we're about to call you up. Don't get comfortable. All right, Martin, let's go live and let everybody in. I can't tell if that's a on-the-air light or a fire alarm light back there. Maybe we should have it fitted out. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And Bruchim Habaim, a blessing of welcome on everybody who is here tonight for this wonderful celebration of Shabbat, which we get every week. But every year at this time, we also bring in the spirit of honoring Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when this weekend coincides with Shabbat. And I'll just say one quick word of Torah before I hand it over to our friend Carl. Not for nothing, this week often aligns with the beginning of this broader Jewish cycle of time where we have our fixed readings every week. And this week, like it happened a couple of years ago, the reading is Shemot. And if that's a foreign word to you, this is the beginning of the book of Exodus. This is the beginning of a story of liberation that has inspired our people for 3,500 years and has inspired people throughout the world as to what is possible when you put faith forward and then keep marching. So it's our honor to have you all here tonight to celebrate Shabbat and celebrate the legacy of Dr. King. And we're going to kick it off with Carl Selkin of our Social Justice Committee, who's going to tell you what's going to happen next.
What happens next is I hobble up to the microphone and say, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And please feel free to move up closer. We're a wonderfully friendly congregation, and the closer we are physically, the closer we'll be spiritually. So anyway, I'd like to welcome everyone and to introduce Anne-Marie Odie and Howard Landau, who are co-chairs with me of the Social Justice Committee. And before we start, I'd like to thank Assemblyman Chris Holden, who is here, Reverend Larry Campbell, and let's see who else, Terry Tornick, our former mayor and much esteemed congregant. I think Rick Cole was going to be around someplace, and Anthony Portantino will be here in a little while. So we have a wonderful group of interesting, important, and progressive politicians here tonight. So as we honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, we remind ourselves how much work there is left to do to repair the world. A bit later this evening, Peter Dreyer will accept the Rabbi Marvin Gross Social Justice Award. But to begin this evening, please welcome Cynthia Kennedy. We asked her to speak to us as a preview of the Dr. Martin Luther King study group, which is gathering Monday, which is the Martin Luther King Day, at 11 a.m. at the California African American Museum in Exposition Park. Please visit CAM to listen to and discuss the entirety of Dr. King's passionate, brave, and inspiring 1967 speech. After services tonight, join us for the Oneg reception and informal discussions. By the way, thanks to Elliot Mazer and his family, we will be using glass plates and actual silverware for noshing at PJTC. We're getting rid of plastic, okay? Except for credit cards, which are always welcome, of course. Some words of gratitude to Cynthia. Recognizing the fierce urgency of now, she leads Pasadena 100, a coalition of 24 area organizations to bring about the rapid transition in Pasadena to 100% carbon-free electrical power by 2030. Growing support makes us optimistic, more optimistic than we've ever been, actually, that this goal will be adopted in the next few weeks by Pasadena City Council. Cynthia chairs the Climate Committee of the Pasadena NAACP, as well as the Environment Committee of the Pasadena Area League of Women Voters. She is the talented, connected, dedicated linchpin that has made success possible. I'm pleased to introduce Cynthia Kennedy, who will help us listen with refreshed minds to Dr. Martin Luther King's 1967 speech at Riverside Church in New York. Cynthia.
Thank you, Carl. I wish to thank Rabbi Carrier and the Social Justice Committee of the Pasadena Jewish Temple for inviting me here tonight. What an honor to be able to join you in this celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy. For the past 10 years, I've helped organize the King Study Group, which sounds like it's very formal and organized, but it really is just a group of people who come together every year for King Day at the California African American Museum, and sometimes we meet in between. And what we do is very simple. Our format is that someone introduces a particular speech or sermon of Dr. King, and we change it every year. It's something different. And we try to avoid the really famous ones like I Have a Dream. We're trying to find some of the more unusual ones to listen to. So we do a little introduction, and then everyone listens. And we really try to follow the injunction of both the Old and the New Testament to hear with our ears, to really hear his words. We don't do much else, we just listen, really. So this evening, we will follow that format. I'm only going to speak for maybe 5 more minutes. And then we will listen to a 15-minute excerpt from a sermon that was delivered by Dr. King on April 4th, 1967. That was exactly 1 year to the day before his assassination. The title of the speech is variously referred to as the Beyond Vietnam speech, or the Time to Break the Silence speech, or sometimes simply the Riverside Church speech. How many of you have ever heard it? I'm just curious. Raise your hand if you've heard it. Okay, so many of you know it. It was delivered at the beautiful neo-Gothic church, the Riverside Church in New York City, in Morningside Heights, near Columbia University in Harlem. There were about 3,000 people there. And Dr. King was invited by an ecumenical group. It was Dr. Commanger, the Amherst College professor, Henry Commanger, who's an historian, the Union Theological Seminary president, John Bennett, and Rabbi Abraham Heschel. And these luminaries had been involved in a group called Clergy and Laymen Concerned About Vietnam. This sermon is certainly the most controversial sermon that Dr. King ever delivered. And he delivered many. At the time, right after it was delivered, he was criticized by the Black community, by the NAACP. He was criticized by Dr. Ralph Bunche, the Black diplomat who was at the UN and was widely respected. The journalistic establishment criticized him. The Washington Post, the New York Times criticized him. And there's a famous, I don't know if you've ever seen it, a famous editorial page headline right under the banner of the New York Times. So the whole editorial board had endorsed this. And it's entitled, Dr. King's Error. So, what was this error? What was the error he made? His error was that he dared to speak out on topics other than civil rights. He dared address topics other than what was called back in those days, and I quote, the Negro problem, close quote. He dared to link what he called the triplet evils of racism, militarism, and materialism. Now, I remember this vividly, actually. I remember the debate because I was 16 at that time. And my childish mind, I was concerned with my Sweet 16 party and whether the boy that I liked was going to ask me to go study. And, you know, I had all sorts of concerns in my life, but I remember my mother was very upset. My mother was of the pro-Dr. King school in our family. And she was outraged that there would be this criticism. And then there was my Aunt Clara, who said, why couldn't he just be happy? You know, wasn't it enough? Wasn't it enough to advance the cause of the colored people? That's the way she would express it. And, you know, she didn't think he was bad, but she just didn't understand why it wasn't sufficient. So I remember this debate. I guess in today's parlance, this would be, why couldn't Dr. King stay in his lane? Many, many years later, I heard a recording of this sermon, and as a mature adult, I was captivated, not by his oratory, though his oratory is amazing. You know, this speech, actually, the part that you're going to hear, it's not that hot. He's still warming up. My pastor, actually, Dr. Larry Campbell, was telling me the other day about how when you do a sermon, you have sort of you start slow and then you build up and then you strike fire and then you calm down. Well, this is still in the starting slow phase, so you're not going to hear a lot of fire right now. But it wasn't just by this oratory that I was struck. It wasn't also by his scholarship, although Dr. King, as those of you who've listened to him, you know he was an erudite scholar. And it's just astonishing the way he's able to bring historical references and explain things. But what struck me was his message. What I gathered from this speech, and the thing that touched me most deeply, was his definition of what a mature spiritual person should be entitled to talk about. In this sermon, you're going to listen for some of his words. He uses the term, the field of my moral vision. He talks about seeing, and he uses the word beyond, probably 7 or 8 times. You're supposed to see beyond national allegiance, beyond the calling of race or nation or creed. And I love this one, beyond the prophesying of smooth patriotism. In the last years of Dr. King's life, he had a broad field of moral vision. He decried war and imperialism. And in those days, you didn't use the word imperialism very much if you were kind of in the mainstream. He addressed racism in the North. He worked with labor organizations. Only a few months after this speech, he had begun working with sanitation workers in Memphis, which was, of course, where he was assassinated. As spiritual, mature beings, he taught that our vision must not be circumscribed. We see racism, we see violence, we see war, materialism, and following Dr. King, we see them all together in one large field of moral vision. That's what touches me about this speech. So I ask you, if Dr. King were alive today, would his field of moral vision have included the self-destructive materialism that has led the human race to use fossil fuels for money, to the point of destroying the ability of future generations to live on our earthly home. Would he have followed the conformist thought that we need to stay in our lane? If we don't know about energy, we shouldn't talk about it. A scientist wrote me an email today, a famous scientist I was trying to enlist for Pasadena 100. And she said she just didn't know enough about it and she didn't feel comfortable. So I'm trying to think of what am I going to say to her in response. I think that Dr. King, just as he saw the children of Vietnam suffering under our bombardment, I think Dr. King would speak out for the children of today and tomorrow and the day after that. I think he would be protesting. I think he would be speaking out. I believe that his field of moral vision would take it all in. And so, now, please imagine yourself in the grandeur of the Riverside Church in Morningside Heights. The lights are coming through the stained glass windows, and you are there with 3,000 people of all colors and all religions. And Dr. King comes up to the pulpit.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I need not pause to say how very delighted I am to be here tonight, and how very delighted I am to see you expressing your concern about the issues that will be discussed tonight. I also want to say that I consider it a great honor to share this program with Dr. Bennett, Dr. Comminger, and Rabbi Heschel, some of the distinguished leaders and personalities of our nation. I come to this magnificent house of worship tonight because my conscience leaves me no other choice. I join you in this meeting because I'm in deepest agreement with the aims and work of the organization which has brought us together, clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. A time comes when silence is betrayal. That time has come for us in relation to Vietnam. The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all the apathy of conformist thought within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Moreover, when the issues at hand seem as perplexing as they often do, in the case of this dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty. But we must move on. And some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found that the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony. But we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision. But we must speak. And we must rejoice as well, for surely this is the first time in our nation's history that a significant number of its religious leaders have chosen to move beyond the prophesying of smooth patriotism to the high grounds of a firm dissent based upon the mandates of conscience and the reading of history. Perhaps a new spirit is rising among us. If it is, let us trace its movements and pray that our own inner being may be sensitive to its guidance, for we are deeply in need of a new way beyond the darkness that seems so close around us. Over the past 2 years, as I have moved to break the betrayal of my own silences and to speak from the burnings of my own heart, as I have called for radical departures from the destruction of Vietnam, many persons have questioned me about the wisdom of my path. At the heart of their concerns, this query has often loomed large and loud. Why are you speaking about the war, Dr. King? Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix, they say. Aren't you hurting the cause of your people, they ask. And when I hear them, though I often understand the source of their concern, I'm nevertheless greatly saddened, for such questions mean that the inquirers have not really known me, my commitment, or my calling. Indeed, their questions suggest that they do not know the world in which they live. I come to this platform tonight to make a passionate plea to my beloved nation. This speech is not addressed to Hanoi or to the National Liberation Front, but rather to my fellow Americans. That is, at the outset, a very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in that struggle. It seemed as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both black and white, through the poverty program. There were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Then came the build-up in Vietnam, and I watched this program broken and eviscerated, as if it was some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war. And I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor, so long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw men and skills and money like some demonic destructive suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and to attack it as such. Perhaps a more tragic recognition of reality took place when it became clear to me that the war was doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. It was sending their sons and their brothers and their husbands to fight and to die in extraordinarily high proportions relative to the rest of the population. We were taking the black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Holland. And so we have been repeatedly faced with the cruel irony of watching Negro and white boys on TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. So we watched them in brutal solidarity, burning the huts of a poor village, but we realized that they would hardly live on the same block in Chicago. I could not be silent in the face of such cruel manipulation of the poor. As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent. For those who ask the question, aren't you a civil rights leader? And thereby mean to exclude me from the movement for peace, I have this further answer. In 1957, when a group of us formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, we chose as our motto to save the soul of America. We were convinced that we could not limit our vision to certain rights for black people, but instead affirmed the conviction that America would never be free or saved from itself until the descendants of its slaves were loosed completely from the shackles they still wear. In a way, we were agreeing with Langston Hughes, that Black Bart of Harlem, who had written earlier, "Oh, yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be." Now it should be incandescently clear that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war. If America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read Vietnam. It can never be saved so long as it destroys the deepest hopes of men the world over. So it is that those of us who are yet determined that America will be are led down the path of protest and dissent, working for the health of our land. As if the weight of such a commitment to the life and health of America were not enough, another burden of responsibility was placed upon me in 1954, and I cannot forget that the Nobel Peace Prize was also a commission to work harder than I had ever worked before for the brotherhood of man. This is a calling that takes me beyond national allegiances. But even if it were not present, I would yet have to live with the meaning of my commitment to the ministry of Jesus Christ. To me, the relationship of this ministry to the making of peace is so obvious that I sometimes marvel at those who ask me why I am speaking against the war. Could it be that they do not know that the good news was meant for all men, for communists and capitalists, for their children and ours, for black and for white, for revolutionary and conservative? Have they forgotten that my ministry is in obedience to the one who loved his enemies so fully that he died for them? What then can I say to the Viet Cong, or to Castro, or to Mao as a faithful minister of this one? Can I threaten them with death, or must I not share with them my life? And finally, as I try to explain for you and for myself the road that leads from Montgomery to this place, I would have offered all that was most valid if I simply said that I must be true to my conviction, that I share with all men the calling to be a son of the living God. Beyond the calling of race or nation or creed is this vocation of sonship and brotherhood, because I believe that the Father is deeply concerned, especially for his suffering and helpless and outcast children. I come tonight to speak for them. This I believe to be the privilege and the burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties which are broader and deeper than nationalism and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions. We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those it calls enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers.
I want to thank Sean Paper for his generosity and skill in editing that together and making it possible for us to do this here. I want to thank our guests for speaking so sternly beforehand. I wasn't here, but I was in my office making sure our live streaming was working, so because everybody should get to see that. We're now going to begin our traditional Friday night service in a traditional way, and then perhaps we may do something untraditional. So I hope you'll bear with us. The first thing we like to do on Friday nights, first is say Shabbat Shalom. All the times before this was just practice. Shabbat Shalom. So how we like to begin this service is with increasing the light in our spaces, in our homes, and in our hearts. And these lights are represented by these candles that were lit ahead of time, but they have not had the blessing said near them. So I want to invite the co-chair of the SJC, Anne-Marie Odie, to say the blessing over the candles.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner, shel Shabbat.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom.
And now for the traditional, untraditional part, I just want to say a few words of introduction. For those of you who come often or come occasionally, this part of the service that we're entering into, which is called Kabbalat Shabbat, it's called Welcoming the Sabbath. The idea is that some of the mystics of our tradition, the people who were of strong feeling and creative aptitudes, about 500 years ago said, we can't just pray our regular prayers. I just came off a really hard week. How do we take this, Sheshet Yamim Tavod, the 6 days of work, and immediately ascend to the peace of Shabbat? We need a little help. And so they composed some original music and brought in some traditional poems of our poet King David in the form of the Psalms, and they constructed something that helped them to get into the feeling of Shabbat before getting into the regular prayers. In that spirit, to help us get into the feeling of Shabbat in a way that I hope will include everybody in this room, we're doing something we haven't done a whole lot before. You may notice that we've encouraged you to sit closely together because this is going to go the best if we do. For those who have been here many times, you won't hear all the songs you normally hear, maybe one song we normally hear, but we're going to hear it in a totally new way. One of the instructions of David is Shir l'Adonai Shir Chadash. Sing to God a new song. And even if you're singing an old song, because that's what the comfort you need, sing it in a new way. And so for those of you who haven't been to this kind of service before, you're learning with the rest of us. However, I highly encourage you to sing with us. And Cantor, our wonderful teacher, is going to help us all do that.
Shabbat Shalom. We're going to take these moments of Kabbalat Shabbat with only one prayer. We will focus on Lecha Dodi. And for right now, even though you know it is page 21 and 22, I'm going to ask you not to look at it. I want you to just be here for a moment. And I want you to repeat after me. Na, na,
Na, na,
try that again. Na, na.
na, na.
Now let's do those two nanas together. Na, 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 na. Good. Doable. Second part. Na, 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 na. Let's try that again. Na, 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 na. One more time. Na, 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 to do it again a little louder. 1, get ready. 2, breathe. 3. Na 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 na. One more time. Na 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 na. Good. Can you hear your neighbor? Good. I can hear you. The last section of this, Lecha dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabla, you will get a chance to look at your words in a moment. Here we go. Na 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 na. I'm going to do it again. Na 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 na. One more time. Na 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 na. And the last fourth one. Na 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 na. We close it. Na na na. How many of you are familiar with this melody? Have heard it before? Good. Good. So you can help. Good. The second part of it. Na 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 na. Try that again. Na 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 na. And then close it. Na 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 na. Let's try from the beginning together. Lean on your neighbor if you don't remember how it goes. Na 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 again. Na 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 na. Try that again from the beginning. La da, ya da, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, la 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 la, ya da da, ya da 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 da. Page 21.
Can I say something?
You can say anything.
I love songs where everybody knows the words.
Right now you're saying we're going to start with a melody. Page 21. Lecha dodi likrat kala. Those are the words of our pizmon, our refrain. We will go back to it after every stanza. Feel free.
And if those words are challenging, you use the other words that you know as well, just as long as you make sound. And the last thing I'll say is, if music affects you in a different way, more rhythmically, we've provided these wonderful percussion instruments if you feel like tapping on them. They're called your pews, if you like.
Okay. Just remember that it's an exercise. Shabbat is an exercise into getting into our own souls. No one is going to be grading you. You don't need to worry if you do it wrong, because you're not going to be doing it wrong. You're just going to be doing it differently. So let's join together.
And if you are self-conscious about your singing, do what I do. Close your eyes. Nobody can tell it's you.
Lecha dodi. Let's welcome Shabbat. Lecha dodi, lecha dodi likrat kala, penei Shabbat lekabela, lecha dodi likrat kala, penei Shabbat nekabela בקרב. שמור וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל עמי בתחילה. Together, really loud.
לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלם, פני שבת נקבלם. לך דודי לקראת כלם, פני שבת נקבלם. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, כי מקור הברכה מראש מקדם נסוכה. סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. Together, let's join in. I want to hear you. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. מקדש מלך עיר מלוכה, קומי צאי מתוך ההפכה, רב לשבת בעמק הבכה, והוא יחמול עלייך חמלה. One more stanza. התנערי מעפר קומי, לבשי בגדי תפארת תחמי, על יד בן ישי ביתה לחמי, קורבה אל נפשי גאלה. Let's join together. לך דודי דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורך קומי אורי, 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 שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך. Next page 22. לא תבושי ולא תקלמי, מה תשתוכחי ומה תהמי, בך יחסו עניי עמי, ונבנית העיר על תלה. Together. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. והיו לי משיסה שוסייך, ורחקו כל מבלייך, יאסיס עלייך אלייך, כמסוס חתן על כלה. ימין ושמאל, ימין ושמאל תפרוצי, ואת אדוני תריצי, על יד איש בן פרצי, ונשמחה ונגילה. Together. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. We face the entrance to welcome Shabbat.
בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצולה, תוך אמוני ים סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני Shabbat nekabela. Forget about the words. Yaira, 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 la, 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 la. Yaira, la, 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 ya, la, la. Ya, la, 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 ya, la, la. Ya, ya, la, 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 la. One more time. And la, la. Try that again. This time I'm going to do it super softly. How are you?
I don't know about you, but that moment of silence in the middle, I don't know if anybody else that gave a little, well, we have a Jewish word for it, shpilkus. It's like ants in your pants, like, what is this? But then it reminded me of this teaching I heard from a musician. He was a jazz musician. And he said, sometimes the most beautiful notes are the rests. And I've never heard a better teaching about Shabbat in my life. So thank you, Cantor Ruth, for bringing that to us. It was beautiful. And thank you all for sharing your voices in this place. It sounded fantastic. So it's now my honor to initiate the beginning of the Rabbi Marv Gross Awards. Are we starting with Anne-Marie?
Shabbat Shalom to all. This is a joyous occasion, even if bittersweet, an annual tribute to a very, very important person, a leader, a friend to all of us, and an activist who made a huge difference in Pasadena and beyond, Rabbi Marv Gross. Tonight, we honor his close friend, Peter Dreyer, with the Marv Gross Award, and I am going to start off by letting you all know some more about our dear friend Marv from his daughter, Becky.
Hi everyone, my name is Becky Gross and I'm Marv Gross's daughter, and I'm honored to be here today to present the Social Justice Award on his behalf. When I was 11, my dad took me to work with him at Union Station. I had no idea what I was in for, but the promise of having lunch with him at Vince's Deli sold me. As soon as we got to the adult center, he took me to the kitchen and introduced me to the head chef, Helen. She quickly gave me an apron and a pair of gloves and put me to work. I spent the morning making chili with her and the other volunteers. When we were done making lunch, I got to serve each client as they passed by the counter. My gloves were too big for my hands and kept slipping off. But I didn't care because I was so excited to be there. Helen stood next to me, and as each client passed by, she told them that I was Marv's daughter. They all lit up with joy. As promised, we had lunch afterwards, and he would tell me stories about the clients. How long he'd know them, their favorite hobbies, and what he was doing to help them. The importance of kindness and treating people with dignity. That was the first time I volunteered at Union Station, but certainly not the last. I continued to volunteer during the summers. I didn't understand what my dad was teaching me at the time or the profound impact this would have on my life. After I graduated college, I gravitated towards jobs geared towards social justice causes. When I started working in the affordable housing sector, I would call my dad during my commute home, and we'd commiserate about the issues at hand. The difficulties navigating the bureaucratic systems, how creating change can be slow and frustrating, and how tiring it is to be an advocate for social justice. There were many days when I was ready to throw in the towel and try something else. My dad would simply say something like, "Yes, it's hard, but remember your wins. Keep focused and stay the course. Eventually, it'll all be worth it. Think about the people you're helping." He would also throw in some Jewish proverbs, like, "If I'm only for myself, what am I? And whoever saves a single life, it is as if he or she has saved all of humanity." He would remind me that each human life is precious and valuable, and I was not required to take on the entire burden, but making a small impact was still worthy. He taught me to take a stand for what I believe in, unlock my heart for the benefit of serving others, and aspire to create a caring community because our faith and welfare is interwoven with those around us. This was his guiding light. My dad strongly believed in the values of inclusiveness, service to others, and kindness. Judaism motivated him to devote his life to service. He believed in Rabbi Hillel's quote, "Do not separate yourself from the community. Because as my dad would say, other people are important, and you have a responsibility to them. He dedicated his life to working for social justice and alleviating human suffering. He advocated for change in the community, specifically with the Social Justice Committee, where he helped organize rallies, protest marches for immigrant rights, create police accountability, promote tenant rights, and strive for racial justice. Giving to his community was ingrained in his DNA. It was in his core. It's what inspired him. Tikkun olam, repair the world and make it a better place. I'm proud to be here today to present an award in my dad's honor to commemorate his legacy of social justice to his dear friend, Peter Dreyer. Peter, I know how much my dad enjoyed working with you on the Social Justice Committee and how much it meant to him to share his passion with you. If he were here today, he would probably want to go to a baseball game with you to celebrate all of your accomplishments. Thank you for all you have done to contribute to our community and make it more equitable. Congratulations on this well-deserved award.
The question was, do I talk about Peter for a minute? And so I will talk about Peter for a minute. I've known him for a few years, and sometimes I feel, and you might not think this upon first glance, but in some ways we are the same person. We both love social justice. We both were close friends of Marv. He's from Newark. My mother is from Newark. We both love baseball, and we don't mince words when we are angry or passionate or concerned about something. And a few years ago, Peter, in his usual way, said to me, Terry was part of Sisterhood working on the oneg, and it was Friday night. And during the oneg, and we're all eating and enjoying ourselves, and Peter looks at me in his Peter way and says, "What are you doing here on a Friday night?" Thank you, Peter. And I said, "Because in a few years, the world will change in so many ways, but we will be here giving you the award that you so richly deserve." I will indulge and say one more minute of things. It's not that I don't have enough in common with Peter and we're friends and see each other, but then Peter started to invade my professional life. In my day job as an activist and representative for the building trades unions of Los Angeles and Orange counties, I was apprised one day that a major initiative was on its way, kind of like the nuclear bomb of voter initiatives. And it was our job to raise money for and work our tuchuses off to make this pass in the election of November 8th of 2022. And when I said, and where did this idea come from? Where did this idea to tax the sale of high-end property in the city of Los Angeles to raise approximately $800 million a year to go straight to affordable housing, one of the causes so dear to Marv's life, as well as renter protection to keep people from losing their homes in the first place, being told that this was my job for the next few months to make sure that this passed, albeit, I'll be honest, 50% plus one, not the 66.66 that we needed for some other things, but still. I said, who came up with this? And someone said, professor, Oxy professor, big Peter Dreyer. I said, Peter Dreyer? I said, my friend from Temple? I'll never, ever have time to go to a baseball game because I'm spending my whole summer working on this ballot initiative. Well, thank you very much, Peter. We passed with 58% of the ballot, and we will be put into law and help people change and save their lives. Peter, you don't stop giving, you don't stop working, you don't stop doing this. I thank you so much. Without you, honestly, this would not have happened. We always say it would have been enough. I don't know what you are going to come up with for an after act to that one, but I will be there to work on it with great, great enthusiasm. In Marv Gross's name and with all of his love from his family, tonight we are so happy to give you the Marv Gross Social Justice Award. Come on up, please.
Following Dr. King,
That's a hard act to follow. So I want to thank the rabbi. I'd like to thank Becky in particular. Thank you, Becky, for being here tonight. And when I see you, it reminds me how much I loved Marv. Thank you to Carl for being such a great leader of our Social Justice Committee. Thank you to Anne Marie for being another great leader of our Social Justice Committee and of the labor movement in the area. And thanks to the whole committee. Thanks to my wife Terry and my daughter Amelia, who were here, for sort of putting up with me. And thanks to Reverend Campbell for being here. And I see Senator Portantino here. Thank you, Anthony, for being here tonight. There's a phrase in Jewish tradition from Pirkei Avot, the sayings of our fathers. It's not up to you to finish the task, but you are not free to avoid it. My political mentor when I was younger was a man named Michael Harrington, who in 1962 wrote a book called The Other America that inspired Presidents Kennedy and Johnson and the country, this slim little book, to declare a war on poverty. It was a book about poverty in America, which at the time people didn't know existed, except the poor who knew they were there. And so Mike Harrington knew that it would take decades, maybe even longer, to eliminate poverty, and that it was necessary to organize movements to keep the pressure on our public officials to make it happen. And he used to say, I heard him say this many times, that to be an effective progressive, you have to be a long-distance runner. In fact, his autobiography is called A Long-Distance Runner. But I actually think a more appropriate metaphor for being an effective progressive and organizer is to be a relay runner, which means someone who takes the baton from an older generation and then passes it on to the next generation. And Marv was a long-distance runner, and he was also a relay runner because he both inherited for many years his activism as a rabbi, as the head of Union Station, and as an activist here at the synagogue. And then we are all the beneficiaries of Marv's passing the baton to us. And so we have to live up to that legacy. He was the first chair of the Social Justice Committee and the founder of it, in fact. And this annual Martin Luther King Shabbat was his idea. He believed in interfaith and interracial activism, and he reached out in our community beyond the walls of Union Station, beyond the walls of our synagogue, to build bridges with other faiths and other communities. So we're lucky that he handed the baton to us. As Becky said, he ran Union Station Homeless Services for 25 years. He was a rabbi, but Union Station was his congregation. And I know from firsthand experience, and as Becky alluded to, the staff and the volunteers and the guests at Union Station, they loved Marv for his kindness, his empathy, his incredible sense of humor. And he was also a damn good fundraiser, a great employer, and a great administrator. So many people think of organizations like Union Station as a form of charity, where better off people provide aid and comfort to people suffering from disease and poverty or other afflictions, where the haves are helping the have-nots. And that's true. Marv believed in charity, but he believed even more in social justice. He wasn't a do-gooder. He was a radical. For example, he believed that housing was a human right and that everyone deserved a place to live, a decent and affordable place to live. It shouldn't be dependent on homeless shelters and on charity. He believed that everybody deserved a living wage and a job. He was inspired by the teachings of the Jewish prophets and the examples of Jews who were active in the labor movements, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and other progressive causes. And here in Pasadena, he played a really major role in advocating for changes in public policy in order to prevent homelessness and lift people out of poverty. I remember going to see Marv at one point when we were running the campaign for a minimum wage here in Pasadena, and I went into his office at Union Station, and I asked him if he would get involved with the campaign, and of course he said yes. And I wasn't sure that how active he would be, because a lot of the nonprofits were sort of worried about raising the minimum wage because they're employers as well. So Marv took it upon himself to organize all the social service nonprofits in Pasadena and to reach out to lots of clergy at synagogues and mosques and churches across the city, and to get them to embrace, endorse, and help to organize on behalf of the minimum wage. And it was partly, perhaps mainly, because of Marv's involvement that about 7 years ago, we passed a $15 minimum wage here in Pasadena. That's what Marv meant by tikkun olam. Not just repairing the world, but changing the world. Not only providing thoughts and prayers when there's a crisis, like somebody getting shot or killed, but a better world by organizing for change and changing public policy and changing our institutions. So Marv was a hero to many people here in Pasadena, but I have to say Marv wasn't a saint. Injustice made him angry, and he could occasionally lose his temper when people in positions of power and authority abused that authority and that power. And I've seen him get angry. You don't want to be on the other end of Marv's anger. And so, like the Jewish prophets, he was filled with righteous indignation. So, in honor or in Marv's spirit of his building bridges, of his empathy, of his love of Judaism, of his concern for the most marginalized in our society, and his devotion to devoting his life to social justice, I want to close with asking, what would Marv be doing today to fight for social justice here in Pasadena? I want to mention 4 things that we all should be doing in his spirit over the next couple of years. Number 1, the voters of Pasadena passed a Measure H for rent control in November. And that will begin in April, the implementation of that law. Unfortunately, the majority of the city council right now is probably not that enthusiastic about it. And so there's going to need to be pressure to make sure that Measure H is implemented in a way that is fair to landlords, but also fair and just for the renters who make up a majority of Pasadena's population, most of whom are people below the median income. And so keeping the pressure on our elected officials to make sure that Measure H is implemented in a way that, for example, there are posters on the buses in Pasadena that tell people, know your rights if you're a tenant, and know your responsibilities and rights if you're a landlord. That gets the word out. So number 1, we were really lucky, and the voters spoke. Every city council district, more than majority voted for rent control. So it's a citywide effort, and now we have to translate that into making it work. So that's number 1. Number 2, and Cynthia mentioned this briefly in her remarks before I listened to the Dr. King speech. Pasadena 100 has been organizing to get the city, the Department of Water and Power, to be powered by 100% carbon-free energy by 2030, and to get the city council and the municipal utility to do that, to end our reliance on fossil fuels. And that's something that Marv cared about also. And that's going to take organizing, and it's going to take constant pressure. So that's number 2. Number 3, Marv spent a lot of his time through the Social Justice Committee and on his own on police reform here in Pasadena. There's been a lot of unnecessary violence by the police department and misuse of weapons and racism and racial profiling. And there are some unresolved cases. And so we need to make sure that the Citizens Oversight Committee that was put into place after the protests around Black Lives Matter in 2020, that works, and that the police department under new leadership now does a better job. And that's going to take all of us, not just folks in the Black and Latino communities, but all of us to make sure that the police are held accountable. And, most cops are good cops and they want to do their job, and some of them, act like they're social workers. They really want to help people. But we need to make sure that the hierarchy of the police department holds the force accountable for when they do abuse their power and authority. And finally, there's a new issue on the table now, which is that the city of Pasadena now finally has control of the land that was cleared when they were proposing the freeway of the 710 freeway. They tore down hundreds of homes and businesses. They just, and like many other cities that did that, they mostly focused on tearing down the homes and businesses in the Black community. And people were scattered. They lost their homes. They lost their businesses. And it's been sitting there for, over 25 years, the largest piece of developable land in the city right now. And so now the city has a chance to compensate people and compensate the city for that racial injustice. And there's a committee that's going to be formed by the city council to figure out how to make that happen, to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes of urban renewal and highway building. Fortunately, they shut down the construction of the 710. It never got built, but in its wake is all this land that we need to do, we need to make sure is done through justice. So rent control, the end of fossil fuels, police reform, and reparations for the 710 freeway, and racial justice. Finally, as part of this Marv Gross Award, I get to designate $500 to my favorite charity. Now, California is not at risk right now of eliminating the right to abortion like many other states are, because the voters just incorporated the right to abortion in the state constitution through a referendum in November. But that's not the case in many and a growing number of states around the country, especially since the right-wing and Republican Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade a few months ago. So I've decided to donate my $500, or the Social Justice Committee's and the Temple's $500, to something called the Brigid Alliance, BRIGID Alliance. You can go on the web and find it. It's brigidalliance.org. It's pretty easy. Brigid Alliance. It helps women travel to states that still have legal abortion. For states that have prohibited abortion, women still need to have abortions. And so this organization raises money to pay for everything: transportation, food, lodging, childcare, whatever a woman needs to travel from her state to have an abortion. So the $500 is going to go to the Bridget Alliance. Finally, let me say that I love this institution, this synagogue. I appreciate the support that the congregation has given to our Social Justice Committee. I hope as we do a search for our next rabbi, which we'll be doing soon, that we remember Marv and think of him as the kind of rabbi we'd like to have. I love Rabbi Carrier, and I'm sad he's going, but we're going to have another rabbi, and I hope that Marv is a Marv's spirit is on the search committee. So thank you again, Toda Rabbah, for the award, and in Marv's name, in Marv's spirit, in Marv's honor, I really appreciate that you gave me this award. I think of Marv every day, and he helps to animate me to do the kinds of things that I do with the support of my family and my friends. So thank you very much.
Need you back here.
On behalf of Assemblymember Chris Holden, who was here earlier, his representative Anne-Marie Hickenbottom is here to make a proclamation for Peter. Thank you very much.
Good evening and welcome. Again, I'm pleased to be here on behalf of Assemblymember Holden, who was here earlier and presented his friend and supporter Peter with a proclamation. And is it at your seat? What did you do with it?
My wife has it.
Oh, can I? Just
Okay,
wanted to,
you want to bring it up?
to show it to those. And very pleased to support you and recognize this great honor, Peter Dreyer, the Marv Gross Social Justice Award, in your more than 30 years as activist, organizer, journalist, official, and scholar of urban policy. You have exemplified your impassioned commitment to social justice. Congratulations on the well-deserved honor. Assemblymember Chris Holden.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll give it back to you.
Okay.
Stay up here.
And now we have the honor of having our State Senator, Anthony Portantino, present Peter with an honor. Thank you.
Before I talk about Peter, I just have to say, every time I hear the cantor sing, I don't know about you, but it just does something, don't you think? I mean, she's just spiritual, warm, loving, I mean, God, just thank you for being you, and just blows me away every time I hear her sing. So, and I also, Peter, New Jersey, you know, we got that attitude going. Though he has the accent, I don't have the accent, but I have the attitude. And we both love baseball. Though the Mets, you know, yeah, I'm still a Mets fan, and he ditched the Mets for the Dodgers. So they did leave Brooklyn, Peter, just in case you didn't know that. The Dodgers did leave Brooklyn. And I also, you mentioned the 710 stub, and I want to give a shout out to Mayor Tornek, who's here, because the reason why Pasadena is developing that stub is because Mayor Tornek realized that the city needed legislation to authorize them to own it again and to develop it, and he called me and said, Senator, we need to do this. And so I want to give a shout out to Terry for making that happen. And then, Peter, I was thinking, what do I say about you and what do I do? I mean, you know, you're a patriot, you're a rebel, you're a revolutionary, you're a professor, you challenge. I mean, you're the only person I know that accepts an award but then lectured all of us of what we have to do to carry on Marv Gross's legacy. And obviously, you know, we're here to honor Marv as well. So I wore my Liberty Bell tie to honor you, because I was thinking, there's cracks in our country, and the Liberty Bell has that crack, but yet if you've ever seen it, there's a rivet in the crack that sort of holds it back together, and that's Peter. Peter's that rivet that sort of looks at the crack in our society and tries to make us put it all back together and make it better. And so you're a dear friend. You challenge us. And I always say the role of the activist is to make us do better. And I think that's what Peter does. He challenges us to do better, to use our position for the purpose and the honor that we've been elected to do. And so I just want to thank the temple and the rabbi and the Gross family for just setting an example for all of us, and then Peter for sort of carrying it home and continuing to fight the good fight every single day of your life and even tonight. So God bless you and thank you. And on behalf of the California State Senate, I join with this wonderful congregation to thank you for your service and your legacy.
Can I go now?
As I love to say, you may be seated. So in a moment, but not just yet, we're going to begin the second part of our Shabbat service, and this is Mari. This is the service of the evening, and before we do, I know sometimes people get uncomfortable when people clap in the synagogue, right? And I get it, I get it. I was raised in a very Protestant way myself. But I like when people have energy in the synagogue. I say conservative Judaism, we're like the Episcopalians of Judaism. I like when people have energy in the synagogue, right? We had the example in photography and in film of Rabbi Heschel, who said when he marched with Dr. King, he was praying with his feet. I believe in honoring not just Peter, but also Marv, and the values they stood for. When people were clapping, they were really praying with their hands. And that is holy. Now, as we pivot to this final part of the service, I want you to pray with your breath, with your voices, and with all that energy. And remember how well we sang together, maybe for the first time or for the first time in a while. And with that spirit, we're going to ask you to please rise. If you're following along on a page, the page would be 28. And this is our call to blessing, the Baruch Hu.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. ומעביר יום ומעביר לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, אמרי ורבי.
Amen. We bless God for illuminating our lives. We bless God now for God's constant love. Ahavat Olam, page 29. Seated.
אהבת עולם בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, עמך אהבת. תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת, אותנו לימדת. מצוותיך לעולם ועד, כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה, נגה יומם ולילה. ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל, אוהב עמו ישראל.
Amen.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hashem kivod malchuto l'olam va'ed.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך ובתך ובלכתך בדרך ושוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך.
You can continue in the middle of page 30 at your own pace. We'll all get back together in just a moment.
ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל, ואמרת להם, ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם, ונתנו על ציצית הכנף בתיל תכלת, והיה לכם לציצית, וריתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני, ועשיתם אותם, ולא תתורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו, ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם. Amen.
Page 32. We've already blessed God for illuminating our lives and for constant love. On page 32, we bless God for God's nature as a redeemer, recalling the end of the Exodus narrative that begins tonight when we cross the sea on dry land, and everybody turned around and sang with spontaneous joy, "Who is like you, our God, among all who are worshipped?"
Ya la 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 la
מי כמוך, באלים אדוני, מי כמוך, נהדר בקודש נורא, תהילות עושה מלכותך ראו בניך בוקע ים לפני משה ומרים וכולם זה לי ענו ואמרו זה לי ענו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. Everybody.
ונאמר כפדה אדוני את יעקב וגיה לו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גל ישראל.
Help us, Adonai, to lie down in peace and awaken us again, our sovereign to life. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. On page 33.
One day, one day, one day השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו מלכנו לחיים השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום להעמידנו שומרנו לחיים ושמור את ביתנו ואוהלנו לחיים ושלום מעתה ועד עולם. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום ועמידנו מלכנו לחיים השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום ועמידנו שומרנו לחיים שלום 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 shalom shalom one day one day one day Baruch atah Adonai הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ועל ירושלים. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום אשר היא שבת וינפש. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, וילמד יברח קירותה וימליך מלכותה, וחייכון יום אחד ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בגלה ובגלה ובזמן קריב וימרו. יש מרבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה וימרו.
Like the rest we experience on Shabbat, the pinnacle of our prayer service, the Amidah, this standing prayer, is tonight silent because you have the opportunity to stand in prayer together while praying privately. And this means even though you have your own prayers and your own personal conversations to have with God, no one here prays alone. Let's stand together on page 35b if you want to follow the words, or follow the words in your heart. When you're finished with your private prayer, you may be seated. We'll all get back together in just a little while. conclude this time of private prayer with the Kaddish Shalem on page 48. Page 48.
יתגדל ויתקדש שם רבה,
אמן.
ואלמד דברי חירותה וימליך מלכותה, וחי יכונו ומכונו וחיית כל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב וימרו.
אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה, יתברך.
יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי הקודשה.
ריחו.
לאל אמין כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמת אדם מירם בעלמה וימרו.
אמן.
תתקבל אצלות ולמאותו לכל ישראל קודם אהובון דבשמיא וימרו.
אמן.
יהי שלמה רע משמיא וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל וימרו.
אמן.
עושה שלום במרומיו ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל וימרו.
Amen. In a moment, we'll begin to end our service with our penultimate prayer, which is on page 51. And never like this service that we do every year do I feel the power of the opening line of this prayer. The world that each of us wants to see, it's on us. The Hebrew is Aleinu. Please rise for Aleinu. It's our custom to face the ark.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי ארצות, ולא עשה בנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שנותן שמיים ויוסת משרת על משהו. על כן נקבל לך אדוני אלוהינו יראות מנע ותפארת עוזך. כי המלכות שלך היא ולעולמי עד תמלוך בכבוד, ככתוב בתורתך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ולאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
seated. Before we end any service here at PJTC, we always pause to remember with love and honor those who are no longer with us. Here this week we are marking the yard site, and that's the anniversary of the passing away of Norma Siegel Altschuler, Samuel Alt, Selma Miriam Applebaum, Herman Blumenfeld, Nancy Boughton, Bahia Brewert, Joanne Berkeley, Sophie Carnow, Edith Chesson, Stephen Eagle, Larry Figner, Goldie Frittis, Teresa Friedman, Spencer Gilbert, Irving Moses Glazer, Harvey Goldman, Benjamin Grable, Esther Greenberg, Margit Groda, Joseph Gruber, Morris William Hillinger, Rose Hannah Jacobson, Fanny Jampolsky, Tilly Kaplan, Sarah Katzman, Ruth Diana Margaret Kay, Howard Krimko, Ida Leff, Seymour Levine, Jack Lewis, Max Lifshitz, Abraham and Esther Middleman and children, Israel Morgenstern, Minna Morris, Milton Pepper, Nathan Rappaport, Sadie Rice, Joseph Rosenblum, Maurice Russo, Mira Salem, Benjamin Saltman, Walter Schuster, Sally Schwartz, Herbert Siegel, Barbara Siegel, Lester Stroh, Yetta Weiner, Henry Weinstein, Molly Weinstock, Robert Zabin, and Isidore Zwern. I'd also like to add that it's my fervent prayer that our service here tonight, as people who came from many places but prayed in one voice, sang one song, and came together tonight, that this has been a fitting tribute to the legacy of Dr. King and also to the legacy and memory of Rabbi Gross.
Amen.
If you are in mourning for anyone or marking an anniversary of a passing, I invite you to rise, and we will all pray the Mourner's Kaddish on page 52 with you. Let's pray together. Yit Gadol v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Ba'alma divra kirute v'yamlik malchute b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach le'olam l'almei almaya. Yit barach v'yishtabach v'yit pa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal Shmei dekudsha brihu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran b'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru
Amen.
amen. You may be seated. In just a little while, we are going to adjourn to the social hall for Kiddush, for our sanctification of the day, in which everyone is invited to join us. And also, as we break bread together, this is for everybody. I've heard that there were special instructions regarding the cups because of the activity of our new green committee that's really getting going. So if you're not sure what to do with your cup when you're done, ask Elliot. So he has some definite ideas about recycling. Yes, you will. So everybody, please come back 9:30 tomorrow. People say, well, I don't like these 3-hour Jewish services. If you come at 11, it's only an hour. So with that, we are going to end this service the way we began it, and that was with beautiful, beautiful song. Cantor Ruth, what should we do?
We should first remind Martin that he has to bring the iPad out to the back.
Martin
today
always
we
knows what he's doing.
But today is the first time in a long time that we're doing something different. That's why we're doing that.
Truth.
We are going back to celebrate Kiddush and Motzei together as a community. And so we're bringing the internet world with us as we walk along.
So everybody who's streamed in today can join us as well.
Correct. So I'm going to ask you to please rise, put your prayer books away.
You already know the words.
And just let your body be and your soul be present.
If you feel like dancing, I won't stop you.
Let's join together.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. Join us back here. We have your choice of wine or juice, hopefully carefully marked.
If you want to join us up here, we will do Kiddush, and then we'll schmooze a little more. You're welcome. Make your way into the social hall so we can join in Kiddush.
I think Peter gets the big cup tonight.
There's two big cups. Okay. You tell me when.
Do we need the mics just so that people online can hear us? Or no? Okay, why don't you do it?
Okay. So if you have a Kiddush cup, let's join together. And if not, let's join together anyway. ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר יום השישי, ויחולו השמיים והארץ, וכל צבאם, ויחל אלוהים ביום השביעי, מלאכתו אשר עשה, וישפוט ביום השביעי מכל מלאכתו אשר עשה. ויברך אלוהים את יום השביעי, ויקדש אותו, כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו, אשר ברא אלוהים לעשות. Together, ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו ורצה בנו. ושבת קודשו באהבה וברצון הנחיל לנו, זיכרון למעשה וראשית, כי הוא יום תחילה למקראי קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת עם כל עמים, ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. לחיים.
All right, there's a lot of people here, but we're despite all the rain, we're still in a drought. So I'll wash hands on behalf of everybody. I'll be thinking of you while I do it. Those at home who wish to wash, wash as you wish. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu anu netilat yadayim.
Amen. And last but not least, let's join together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz b'te'avon. Shabbat shalom.
Good Shabbos, everybody.